In the bitter winter of 1876, a fisherman on Boston Harbor made a discovery that would expose one of America's most horrific criminal enterprises. His net, heavy with what he assumed was a remarkable catch, instead raised a wooden trunk sealed with iron bands. When pried open, it revealed the dismembered remains of a young woman, preserved by the frigid waters. This wasn't a random act of violence or a crime of passion. This was the work of Marcus Hale, a man who would soon earn the nickname, the Boston Butcher, and whose reign of terror along the Massachusetts coastline had gone undetected for nearly a decade. Before we continue with Hale's chilling story, I'd like to know where you're watching from. The reach of the butcher's crimes extended throughout New England, with victims from as far south as Baltimore and as far north as Portland, Maine. Leave a comment below and don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten chapters of American history. Marcus Hale didn't look like a monster. Standing at just 5 feet 8 inches with a meticulously trimmed beard and spectacles, he projected the image of a successful businessman, which, in many ways, he was. His shipping company, Hale & Sons Maritime Ventures, had offices on Boston's bustling Commercial Street, and his reputation as a fair employer and generous contributor to local charities made him a respected figure in Boston society. What the public didn't know was that Hale's legitimate business served as the perfect cover for a far more sinister operation. The economic turmoil following the Panic of 1873 had created desperate conditions across America. Banks failed, businesses collapsed, and unemployment soared to unprecedented levels. In Massachusetts alone, over 25% of the workforce found themselves without jobs. For those willing to exploit this desperation, opportunities abounded. Hale's method was as simple as it was effective. Through his shipping connections, he advertised high-paying positions for young women to serve as domestic staff for wealthy families in England and France. In an era when female employment options were severely limited, these positions represented not just financial salvation but the promise of adventure and possible advancement. The advertisements specifically targeted women without family connections, recent immigrants, orphans, and those who had traveled to Boston seeking work in the city's textile mills. The application process was held at Hale's warehouse on the wharf, deliberately scheduled during evening hours when the surrounding businesses were closed. Young women who arrived for interviews were never seen again. According to later court testimony, Hale would conduct legitimate-seeming interviews, complete with paperwork and promises of immediate departure on waiting ships. Once the formalities were complete, he would offer his victims tea laced with laudanum, a powerful opiate mixture, rendering them unconscious. What happened next was revealed in horrifying detail through Hale's own journals, discovered hidden in a secret compartment in his office desk. The writings, which Boston Police Captain James Sullivan described as the most disturbing document I have encountered in 20 years of law enforcement, detailed how Hale would transport his unconscious victims to a specially constructed room in the warehouse basement. The room, later dubbed the Butcher's Chamber by newspaper reporters, was lined with copper sheeting to contain blood and equipped with drains leading directly to the harbor. Here, Hale methodically dismembered his victims, placing their remains in weighted trunks that he then disposed of during nighttime excursions on his private yacht, the Elizabeth Rose, named after his deceased wife. If you're finding this story as unsettling as I did researching it, hit that like button and share this with someone who appreciates true crime history. These forgotten tragedies deserve to be remembered, not just for their horror, but for what they teach us about the darker chapters of our past. The discovery in Boston Harbor that winter day in 1876 might never have led to Hale if not for one crucial mistake. The trunk recovered by the fisherman contained not only human remains but also shipping documents bearing Hale's company letterhead. This tangible connection prompted Boston police to investigate the respected businessman, though initially with significant reluctance. Detective William Phelps, a Civil War veteran who had joined the Boston Police Department in 1868, was assigned to the case. His investigation began with simple inquiries at Hale's office that might have gone nowhere if not for the testimony of Abigail Murphy, a 19-year-old Irish immigrant who had applied for one of Hale's overseas positions just 3 days before the discovery in the harbor. Murphy's account proved crucial. Unlike other applicants, she had brought her younger brother Michael, age 12, to the interview. Hale, unwilling to have a witness to his activities, told her she was unsuitable for the position and dismissed her. This deviation from his pattern, allowing Murphy to leave alive, was the thread that, when pulled, would unravel his entire operation. "I thought it strange," Murphy later testified, "that Mr. Hale seemed more concerned with why my brother had accompanied me than with my qualifications. When he learned that Michael would be waiting outside for me, his entire demeanor changed. The tea he had poured remained untouched on his desk, and he suddenly claimed I lacked the proper experience. Detective Phelps, acting on Murphy's testimony, obtained a warrant to search Hale's waterfront warehouse. What they discovered in the basement shocked even the most hardened officers. The copper-lined chamber, surgical instruments, and a ledger book recording dates, names, and disposal locations provided overwhelming evidence of at least 37 murders spanning from 1867 to 1876. The geographical scope of Hale's activities was staggering. His shipping connections extended to New York's bustling ports, Philadelphia's growing industrial centers, and Baltimore's immigrant communities. Investigators would later determine that he had conducted recruitment trips to these cities at least twice yearly, each time returning with unsuspecting victims who believed they were embarking on promising new careers. The social conditions that enabled Hale's crimes cannot be overstated. The Gilded Age's extreme wealth inequality, weak law enforcement coordination between jurisdictions, and society's general indifference to missing lower-class women created perfect hunting grounds for predators. The investigation revealed that several families had reported their daughters and sisters missing after they'd gone to interview with Hale, but these reports were given minimal attention by authorities who assumed the women had simply moved away or fallen into immoral lives. Boston's Beacon Hill elite initially rallied around Hale, unwilling to believe that one of their own could commit such atrocities. The Boston Evening Transcript ran editorials suggesting that Hale was being framed by business competitors or radical labor activists seeking to discredit successful industrialists. This support evaporated when police discovered a collection of personal effects from the victims, lockets, rings, and daguerreotypes, carefully catalogued and stored in Hale's study at his Commonwealth Avenue mansion. The most disturbing aspect of the case emerged during the trial, when psychological experts attempted to understand Hale's motivations. Unlike many killers who act from passion or obvious mental disturbance, Hale appeared to have approached murder as he did his business ventures, with meticulous planning and dispassionate efficiency. His journal entries revealed not sadistic pleasure but a cold, analytical approach to his crimes. One entry, dated March 12, 1872, read, Subject 23 processed and dispatched. Weight of trunk 103 pounds. Disposal at Point E7, approximately 3 miles east of Deer Island. Time required, 4 hours, 17 minutes. Improvements to procedure continue to yield efficiency. If you're still with me, I want to take a moment to honor the victims of these horrific crimes. Though most of their names have been lost to history, they were real women with hopes, dreams, and families who mourned them. In telling these stories, we ensure that they are not forgotten, that their lives mattered beyond their tragic ends. The trial of Marcus Hale began on April 7, 1877, at the Suffolk County Courthouse. The proceedings attracted unprecedented public attention, with crowds gathering daily outside the courthouse hoping for seats in the gallery. Newspaper reporters from as far away as Chicago and Washington, D.C. traveled to Boston to cover what was being called the trial of the century. Hale's defense team, led by prominent attorney Harrison Blake, attempted to portray their client as insane and therefore not legally responsible for his actions. This strategy failed when prosecution witnesses testified to the methodical nature of the crimes and Hale's careful efforts to conceal evidence. Most damaging was the testimony of his personal secretary, Thomas Whitley, who revealed that Hale had maintained 2 sets of company books, one for legitimate shipping operations and another tracking expenses related to his criminal activities. On May 23, 1877, after just 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a guilty verdict. Judge Samuel Putnam sentenced Hale to death, declaring his crimes an affront to God and humanity, demonstrating a depravity beyond comprehension. The sentence was carried out on September 12, 1877, when Hale was hanged at the Charlestown State Prison before a select group of witnesses. The legacy of the Boston Butcher case extended far beyond the execution. The investigation highlighted critical failures in law enforcement, particularly regarding crimes against women of lower social standing. In response, the Massachusetts legislature passed the Interstate Missing Persons Act of 1878, establishing new protocols for communication between police departments across state lines when individuals went missing under suspicious circumstances. The case also sparked the first serious public discussions about serial murder as a distinct category of crime. Dr. James Thornton, a physician who examined Hale during his incarceration, published an influential paper in the New England Journal of Medicine titled On the Phenomenon of Sequential Homicide, which proposed that certain criminals killed repeatedly not from passion but from psychological compulsion or calculated intent. The warehouse where Hale committed his atrocities was demolished in 1880, and the site remained vacant for decades, considered cursed by local residents. It wasn't until 1923 that development resumed on the property, with the construction of a commercial building that still stands today at 437 Commercial Street. Few of the tourists who visit the now trendy waterfront district realize they're walking past the location of one of America's earliest documented serial murder cases. For those of us who study America's dark history, the case of Marcus Hale serves as a reminder that monsters have always walked among us, often hiding behind respectable facades and exploiting societal blind spots. The economic desperation of the 1870s, the vulnerability of young women seeking employment, and the reluctance of authorities to investigate disappearances created a perfect storm of circumstances that allowed a predator to operate undetected for years. What do you think about this forgotten chapter of American criminal history? Could a killer like Hale operate today, or have advances in forensic science and communications made such crimes impossible to conceal? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this story compelling, please subscribe for more explorations of America's hidden history. Before we end today's journey into the darker corners of our past, I want to acknowledge the historians, archivists, and descendants of victims whose work has preserved these accounts. Without their dedication to uncovering uncomfortable truths, stories like the Boston Butcher might have been lost to time, and with them, important lessons about vigilance, justice, and the value of every human life. The investigation of Marcus Hale extended beyond his Boston operations, revealing a network of facilitators who, while not directly involved in the murders, had enabled his crimes through silence and willful ignorance. The captain of his private yacht, Samuel Thorne, admitted during questioning that he had suspected something wasn't right about their midnight voyages into the harbor, but had accepted Hale's explanation that they were disposing of contaminated merchandise that could damage the company's reputation if discovered. "There's blood on more hands than just Hale's," Detective Phelps told reporters from the Boston Globe in July 1877. When people choose money over morality, when they ignore obvious signs of wrongdoing because acknowledging them might be inconvenient, they become accomplices in a very real sense. This aspect of the case particularly resonated with reformers like Josephine Shaw Lowell, who used the Hale murders to advocate for better protection of vulnerable women in the workforce. In a speech before the Massachusetts Women's Suffrage Association in November 1877, Lowell declared, "The true horror of the Hale case is not just one man's depravity, but an entire society's willingness to look the other way when young women from poor backgrounds vanish. Had these been the daughters of Beacon Hill, would years have passed before investigation?" Her words struck a chord with many Bostonians who had previously given little thought to the dangers faced by working-class women. The resulting public pressure led to the establishment of the Boston Women's Protection League in 1878, which provided safe housing, employment verification services, and a registration system for women seeking work in the city. The ripple effects of the case extended to New York, where Police Commissioner Thomas F. Burns implemented a new system for tracking missing persons across city precincts. Previously, disappearances had been recorded only at the station nearest to where the person was last seen, making patterns difficult to detect. Burns' centralized registry allowed for the identification of trends that might indicate systematic predation rather than random misfortune. As investigative techniques evolved in the decades following the Boston Butcher case, criminologists began re-examining Hale's methods and motivations. Modern analysts have suggested that Hale represented a distinct category of serial murderer, the organized, non-sexual power killer who derived satisfaction not from sexual violence but from the absolute control over life and death. His careful record-keeping, recording the efficiency improvements in his killing process, suggests a mind that viewed murder as a technical challenge rather than an emotional outlet. The discovery of additional journals during the renovation of Hale's former Commonwealth Avenue residence in 1928 provided even more disturbing insights into his psychology. These writings, now preserved in the Massachusetts Historical Society archives, reveal that Hale's criminal evolution began long before his arrival in Boston. Entries dating to his youth in Albany, New York, describe experiments with animal vivisection and an early fascination with anatomy that took a sinister turn. "I have today acquired a new understanding of the femoral structure," reads an entry from 1859, when Hale would have been just 17. The similarities between canine and human skeletal systems are remarkable, though the proportional differences present interesting challenges in application. If you're wondering how someone like Hale could exist in polite society without detection, you're asking exactly the right question. It speaks to a phenomenon criminologists now call hidden in plain sight, the ability of certain predators to construct such convincing public personas that even those closest to them suspect nothing of their true nature. The Boston Butcher case also illuminates the social stratification of 19th-century urban America. Hale's victims, primarily Irish, Italian, and German immigrants, represented communities already marginalized within Boston society. When these women disappeared, the standard assumption among authorities was that they had fallen into prostitution or simply moved away seeking better opportunities. This institutional indifference created what modern criminologists call a low-risk victim pool, people whose disappearances generate minimal official response. Historians researching the case in the 1990s discovered that at least 7 families had filed formal missing persons reports with the Boston police between 1870 and 1875, specifically mentioning Hale's employment agency as the last known whereabouts of their loved ones. None of these reports led to significant investigation until after the discovery of the trunk in Boston Harbor. The physical evidence from the case, including Hale's journals, surgical instruments, and some personal effects of the victims that were never claimed by family members, remained in police storage until 1912, when they were transferred to the newly established Boston Police Museum. The collection was later moved to the Massachusetts State Archives, where selected items are occasionally displayed in special exhibitions on the history of criminal investigation. For those of you fascinated by the locations in this story, many still exist in modern Boston. The Suffolk County Courthouse where Hale was tried now houses the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. Commercial Street along the waterfront has been transformed from industrial shipping to upscale restaurants and luxury condominiums. Hale's Commonwealth Avenue mansion, divided into apartments in the 1920s, stands among the grand historic homes of Back Bay, its dark history unknown to most who pass it daily. The physical transformation of these spaces mirrors our societal evolution in many ways. The brutal working conditions that made women desperate enough to trust strangers with promises of foreign employment have been ameliorated through labor reforms. The communication barriers that prevented police in different jurisdictions from connecting related disappearances have been eliminated through technology. The social indifference that allowed lower-class women to vanish without serious investigation has been at least partially addressed through changing attitudes about equal protection under the law. Yet for all our progress, stories like the Boston Butcher remind us that predators still exist, still seek out the vulnerable, and still exploit societal blind spots. Modern cases like those of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer who targeted sex workers in Washington state, demonstrate that certain populations remain at higher risk due to social marginalization. The lessons of the Hale case remain relevant nearly 150 years later. Perhaps the most poignant memorial to Hale's victims isn't a physical monument, but the legislative changes their deaths inspired. The Interstate Missing Persons Act of 1878 was the first of many reforms that gradually constructed a safety net designed to prevent such systematic predation. Every time a missing person alert crosses state lines, every time police departments collaborate on investigations involving vulnerable populations, the legacy of those forgotten women continues. During my research for this video, I visited the Massachusetts State Archives and was permitted to view Hale's original ledger book, a chilling artifact with its methodical entries recording the systematic destruction of human life. The most striking aspect wasn't the content itself, but the ordinary nature of the handwriting, neat, businesslike script that could have been recording shipping manifests or business transactions rather than murder. Evil rarely announces itself with distinctive flair. More often, it hides behind mundane facades. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the archivists, historians, and researchers who have preserved this difficult history. Confronting the darkest chapters of our past requires both courage and compassion. The courage to look unflinchingly at human cruelty and the compassion to remember that behind every statistic were real people with hopes, dreams, and lives cut tragically short. If this story has affected you as deeply as it has affected me, I'd appreciate you sharing it with others who value understanding our complete history, not just the comfortable parts. These forgotten chapters deserve remembrance not for sensational value, but for the lessons they teach us about vigilance, justice, and the ongoing work of protecting the vulnerable. The case of Marcus Hale also raises important questions about how we memorialize tragedy. While Boston has numerous historical markers commemorating revolutionary battles, famous politicians, and cultural milestones, no official acknowledgement exists for the dozens of women who fell victim to the Boston Butcher. This absence speaks to the selective nature of public memory, which tragedies we choose to remember collectively and which we allow to fade into obscurity. In 2018, a grassroots movement led by Boston University history students proposed a memorial plaque at the Commercial Street site. The proposal, though gaining significant public support, remains under consideration by the city's Historical Commission. The debate around this memorial reflects our ongoing struggle with how to acknowledge historical atrocities without glorifying their perpetrators. As we conclude our exploration of the Boston Butcher case, I invite you to consider the victims not just as passive objects of violence, but as individuals who found themselves caught in circumstances beyond their control. In their time, they represented a hopeful vision of American possibility, immigrants and working-class women striving for better lives, willing to take risks and travel far from home in pursuit of opportunity. That their hopes were exploited by a predator makes their stories not just tragic but profoundly American in their reflection of both vulnerability and aspiration. Join me next week as we explore another forgotten criminal from America's past, the story of the Phantom Arsonist of Chicago, whose fiery campaign of destruction in the summer of 1891 changed urban fire codes forever and exposed corruption at the highest levels of city government. Until then, remember that by studying history's darkest chapters, we illuminate the path toward a more just future.